an announcement from Microsoft's Office 365 team today, Wes, for Linux. Microsoft Teams, their Slack competitor, is officially here. And I'm going to go so far as to say, early prediction, so I'm claiming this one. It's already on my list.
What?
This is a beachhead for Office on Linux.
Oh, you think so? The rest is going to follow suit.
I do.
It's been interesting. There was an open support issue since Teams launched for Linux, and for a long time, it didn't look like it was going to happen. There just wasn't interest. Now it's finally here, although you'll have to go like 3 directory levels deep to find it.
If you go to teams.microsoft.com/download, they do have a more friendly version. But if you get where Wes got linked to, he's like browsing through their web directory.
That was from one of their pages. They linked it to me.
I know. Nobody else in the world, except for existing Office 365 users, was looking for this. But, if you want something besides Slack, there's some really great open source alternatives. However, a lot of Office 365 users.
Right, and Teams gets bundled in there, so of course you probably have to use it. And now there's another Electron app you can use on your Linux desktop.
Yes. Oh, man. Boy, wasn't that on my wish list. So while you were spelunking in web directories, I was just installing it from the AUR because, God bless the AUR, it just showed up immediately.
Nice.
All right. I'm not going to use Teams though. Come on. I'm not using Teams. If anything, I'm going to Mattermost next.
Yeah, but the people who use Teams don't get to choose.
Hello, friends, and welcome into the Unplugged program. My name is Chris.
My name is Wes.
Hello, Wes. I've got a smile today because this is one of those episodes where Wes and Chris are going to do something you shouldn't try at home.
Don't follow along.
Don't do what we do this week. We're busting a stereotype. Fedora worked so well. It blew my mind how great it was as a server OS, and all the stereotypes say don't run Fedora as a server. So we thought, well, let's take that a little bit further, and let's replace our highly critical, perfectly functional Fedora server with an Arch box and report back what the process is like to migrate a live in-production server from Fedora to Arch, lessons we learned, and then truly what we think of it as a server platform, and some of the things we're doing to safeguard the fact that it is a rolling distribution.
I mean, what could go wrong?
We're doing this so you don't have to.
You're welcome.
I'm really not kidding. This box is critically important to us. But we really wanted to test the stereotype. After having really good success with Fedora, we thought we got to replace this Fedora 30 install either with Fedora 31 or CentOS. So let's go to Arch.
We've come a long way from FreeNAS.
Yeah, we really have. So we'll tell you about that in a little bit. But before we go there, we do have some community news to get into. Like, some of this is down the road, maybe going to happen prediction stuff. Like, we don't really know. But the one thing we know is that the Linux Academy Black Friday sale is extended for just a little bit longer. Now, we provide the world's best hands-on training. And hands-on is the key word right there. Hands-on is like the big deal because it's one thing to memorize for the tests. It's an entirely different thing to actually know what you're doing. And our platform allows you to get both in Linux, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, DevOps, containers, security. And right now, the annual Black Friday deal has been extended to just the end of the week that this is coming out. It takes $150 off the entire platform subscription, which gets you access to everything. Everything, Wes.
That's a great deal right there.
So go to learn.linuxacademy.com/Jupiter to grab that. I think it's December 8th. Does that sound right? So it's December 8th that it ends? No, because it's been extended. It's been extended,
It's been extended
to the
until
16th?
December 13th.
Okay,
Through
13th.
the 13th.
The 13th, all right. I knew it was ending really soon, so if you're listening to this now, you got to act pretty quick.
Get in while it's good. It's really good.
So let's start with some of those far-out predictions. NVIDIA looks to have some sort of open-source driver announcement just around the corner. Michael Arbel's hot to the trot with this one over at Phoronix. He says, start looking forward to March, when NVIDIA looks to have some sort of open-source driver initiative to announce, which is likely contributing more to Nauvoo. He was tipped off by a Phoronix reader about a GTC session that's happening at GTC 2020 by NVIDIA. Now, the engineer from NVIDIA, John Hubbard, is running a talk titled Open Source, Linux Kernel, and NVIDIA.
GTC, for the unaware, is the GPU Technology Conference, and boy does that talk have an interesting abstract. Here it is. We'll report up-to-the-minute developments on NVIDIA's status and activities, and possibly, depending on last-minute developments, a few future plans and directions regarding our contributions to the Linux kernel, supporting Nouveau, including assigned firmware behavior, documentation, and patches, and NVIDIA kernel drivers.
Whoa. Okay.
There's a lot in there.
Signed firmware behavior is huge. Documentation would be ginormous, but patches to the actual upstream projects is mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing.
Has something changed inside NVIDIA?
Perhaps they've noticed that AMD is kicking some ass these days. So you're going to have to wait till towards the end of March because GTC 2020 runs from the 23rd to the 26th of March in San Jose. You going to go, Wes? I know you're a big gamer.
I don't think I'll make it, but I will be eagerly awaiting this news.
Hopefully Michael Larbo will make it down there and he'll give us a report back. All right. And then one other kind of far out in the future community news, but one we are so dang excited about. Your co-host and buddy Jim Salter over at Ars Technica writes that the WireGuard VPN is one step closer to mainstream adoption. This is all coming from the Linux Network Stack maintainer David Miller, who committed the WireGuard VPN project to the Linux kernel's NetNext source tree. He maintains both the net and the NetNext source trees, which govern the current implementations of the Linux kernel's networking stack and, of course, the future one.
Yeah, NetNext gets pulled into the new Linux kernel during its 2-week merge window, where it becomes net. With WireGuard already a part of NetNext, this means that, barring unexpected issues, and there's always time for those, there should be a Linux kernel 5.6 release candidate with built-in WireGuard in early 2020.
Just excuse me, Wes. Just going to do a little happy dance.
Something tells me we're going to be trying those release candidates when the time comes.
Now, do take a little bit of salt with this one.
I mean, yeah, the kernel community does what they want. The maintainers have their own priorities and schedules, and we'll see what happens.
We've heard this song before, but we did just recently see the required encryption bits land. We covered that recently. So this is sort of the next required piece. Now, there's kind of an unfortunate possibility on the timing here, because if I'm doing my time math right, and Jim points this out in the article, this is probably going to land after Ubuntu 2004, the next big LTS.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I imagine there'll be long timelines to see it get in other sort of LTS releases like RHEL. But WireGuard founder and main developer Jason Donenfeld offered to do a bunch of the work backporting WireGuard to earlier Ubuntu kernels directly.
Jason.
That's great.
That is. We've had very brief exchanges with Jason in the past, and he seems very passionate about this.
Oh yeah, obviously cares a lot and has put in a ton of work promoting WireGuard to get it where it is.
I hope they take him up on that.
You know, he also teased that a WireGuard 1.0 is on the horizon.
Well, what?
I know.
Wow.
How can it get better than it is?
You know, that's a good thing to say, too. Like, if you could have that land right before 5.6, then you're including 1.0.
Right. We've got here a nice, stable, maintained VPN.
Mr. Brett, you just recently had adventures in WireGuard land.
Yeah, it's been on my docket for about, 6 months. Wes, I've been asking you for like, hey, Wes, when you're ready, if I go ask you, would you help me?
And it turns out you didn't even need it.
Well, it turns out I am more capable of things than I think I am. So this morning I thought, I got a pretty wide open docket, and WireGuard seems like the best thing to do in the morning. So dove right in, and it was super smooth.
What are you using it for? I mean, are you replacing an existing VPN?
Yeah, my idea was I'm currently using private internet access just to give me, as some people may have picked up, I travel quite a bit. So it gives me some extra protection basically everywhere. And so that's been playing fairly nice with my phones and computers. But, they just got sold recently, I believe.
Yep.
And if the rumors are true.
No, they are.
And also the apps they're buggy and they're not native. I don't like them. So I thought, okay, WireGuard seems to make sense. You guys have been telling me it's super stable. So jumped in, had to learn a few things, but there's some great tutorials out there. And just spun up a VPS on our trusty DigitalOcean and got it configured pretty easily, actually. And it's working pretty good.
How proud are you of Brent right now?
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Super proud of you, Brent. Good for you.
No, thanks.
And did you find any particular documentation useful or any kind of tips or tricks you could pass along to people that are also kind of starting from zero?
Yeah, I think my setup is wonderfully simple. All I'm trying to do is have a kind of a dumb server out there that's just waiting for me to connect to it. So it's not doing much fancy stuff, but maybe that's a good place to start. So
absolutely,
I will share in the IRC here the tutorial that I used, and it just kind of like worked. It was super simple, very straightforward, great, written in a nice way that allows you to learn along the way, which is the whole idea.
Excellent. Will you grab that for the show notes, Mr. Payne?
Sure will. And it's great that it's already pretty easy. And once it's in the kernel, it'll be even easier than that.
Yeah, that's the thing. As part of that setup is just getting it installed right now and figuring out how you're going to do that. We just went through the installation process last night ourselves, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Really hope that they do take Jason up on that offer to backport it to the LTS because, like you kind of implied there, Wes, there's also the question of the RHEL release cycle. RHEL is currently using, the current version of RHEL is using the 4.18 kernel, which is already 9 months old, and they tend to stick with that for quite a while.
Yes.
Even that said, it's pretty straightforward to get going, even on a system that doesn't have it baked in.
Right. It's not a big module to load.
No.
And it's very easy to build. And it's one of the better behaved DKMS modules I've ever used.
So this next story kind of made me smile this morning because it felt like the good old days of using a Linux distro. I knew that Manjaro, which I've been running on a couple of my workstations, had an update coming. They've been kind of teasing it on Twitter. But I didn't know when it was going to land. And so as I always like to do, because I think it's the way to keep an Arch system running great, is I decided I'd check my packages this morning. Just do synchronize my mirrors.
It's a show day where you need your workstation to work, so you better update it.
You're right. I really am a dummy, aren't I? I really am dumb. I'm so dumb.
I think you're just excited. You have this great little workstation going, and you're like, oh, there's probably new packages.
You know what it is I just love the way it all looks on the cool retro CRT terminal.
And Pac-Man's so pretty.
Yeah. So anyways, I'm just synchronizing my mirrors, and I notice I'm getting like 30K a second from the mirror. It's just going really slow. And I'm like, oh, must be a big release day because that's how this works. And sure enough, I check on Twitter and a brand new stable release of Manjaro is out. 525 packages needed updating on my system.
Oh, boy.
It includes the new 5.4 LTS kernel and a new version of... Remember I was trying to tell you Manjaro has this package manager that's like unique to them?
Mm-hmm.
PAMIC? Yeah. New version of that, but as well as updated desktops. And just loving it so far. I wasn't sure how the first update experience would be like, but this was great. It was really kind of fun. My mirrors are running slow. And my first thought was, let's go check Twitter and say, hey, look, a new release.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit of difference there if you're used to Arch because it's, not quite rolling.
Right. Yeah, it's just sort of fun to have sort of like moments where like there's a bunch of things, but it's not a complete
It's a mini new Fedora release.
It's mini.
But
yeah, it's
all
the
time.
Mm-hmm. It's a good way to put it. It's a little mini update. And I really think they did a pretty good job of this one. Haven't actually rebooted yet, though, so I'll reserve my...
come on, that's the real test.
I know. I thought, I
got to kick the tires on the new kernel.
Well, now that we have the show at the newer time, I was like, I got to run down there and do the show. I didn't have a half hour.
See, you should have rebooted it and then we'll check at the end of the show.
Yeah, I could run up there. Should I try it? Should I try running up there during like one of our like clips or something and see? I don't know. I hope it works because I'm really falling in love with that workstation.
Well, actually, we've got a tip later on in the show that maybe you should set up on that workstation and then you wouldn't be so worried.
You're right. I totally could set it up on that workstation. Oh, Wes Payne, you are clever. We will definitely be talking about that. But before we get into all of that, I want to mention, speaking of how much I love my dang Plasma desktop, we had ourselves the Making Plasma Brilliant live stream on Friday, and I'm pretty happy to say I think it went decent. We had a good attendance. The Mumble Room was popping. The video after the fact has already been posted and got a lot of views. Relatively
I think
to what I
the sign
expected.
went well is there was just more stuff than we could possibly talk about, and we weren't hunting for content because there's so much to do in Plasma.
Nailed it right at the hour mark. Still got the live stream.
And there's like 6 or 7 topics we just couldn't go into.
I got that internal clock. Pow! Right there. So it's up now. If you are interested in what I do to beautify and make my Plasma desktop, like I say in the video, from basic to brilliant, that link will be in the show notes at linuxunplugged.com/331. And it's up on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/JupiterBroadcasting. And you could just jump in if you want. At the very beginning, I kind of tell you what to expect. So if you just want to know how to tweak your fonts or tweak console, you can just jump to that. Also, Brent just keeps hitting it out of the park. Brunch with Brent and Alan Pope. Mr. Popey sits down with Brent for a fantastic brunch. Is there anything you want to tease? I haven't had a chance to listen yet because it just came out this morning.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff in there. Both of us at the end of the conversation went, geez, that went in a bunch of directions we never expected. So
that's usually the sign of a great brunch with Brent.
I didn't know this about Popey, but he's a very well practiced fuzzy tester. And he tells a little bit about that, his adventures there. So that's a pretty good one.
You get some good Popey flavor. I can tell just by looking at the links. There's some good Popey flavor that comes through on this one. And, we were just sitting around here and said, if there's just one thing we need is Popey on more podcasts. So he's on the Ubuntu podcast. He's on the User podcast. We need him on more podcasts. So Brunch with Brent, extras.show/38.
Maybe someday he'll come back to love.
That's right. What the heck? I forgot him. I remember. Remember that, Wes?
Wes remembers.
Wes remembers. Oh, yeah, but it was really great. So if you've been missing yourself some Popey, also there was recently one with Wimpy, too. I see how it is. Now they got time for brunch.
Sorry, guys. I'm taking at least all the Europeans.
No, actually, I've known these guys for a long time, and I know that just by listening to Wimpy's, I knew I learned stuff about Wimpy, so I know I'll learn stuff about Popey, too. So it's really great. Also, I am so happy to say that our Telegram channel has really leveled up recently. Lots of great conversations going all the time. And thanks to the work of Cheese Bacon and others, we've got some good spam prevention in there now. So it's a really nice, good, clean chat at jupiterbroadcasting.com/Telegram.
Yeah, there's really a fun conversation going on there almost all of the time.
Pretty much all the time because there's folks from all different time zones in there. But you'll also see the host popping in there throughout the day, as well as network announcements. So if you felt like you want to take the conversation beyond just the download, jupiterbroadcasting.com/Telegram. Even sometimes that Wes Payne's in there.
Oh, yeah.
Happens. All right, Wes. So here we were with a perfectly functional Fedora 30 workstation server. Which is even funny to say. Actually, well, we might have used the net install image.
Server, yeah.
So it might have been the server at the end of the day. All right, fine, fair enough. Because there wasn't a GUI installed, but it was still Fedora.
I think we had a workstation USB drive going, though, to troubleshoot.
Did you think I was crazy when we picked Fedora coming from FreeNAS? So the background there is we were running FreeNAS. We had a whole ZFS array that Alan Jude set up for us. But we found FreeNAS to be limiting, so we went to Fedora.
I mean, I'd say limiting is just that it didn't work for our use case. We needed less of appliance because we wanted to manage the server a little more interactively, and we just weren't that familiar with FreeNAS or FreeBSD.
Yeah, and we also wanted to take advantage of being able to run things from the command lines for testing for the show and setting up and spinning up things that are a little more cutting edge that maybe there wouldn't be a pre-cut something for FreeNAS.
I mean, we're Linux nerds. That's what we do.
And honestly, we just wanted a Linux system.
I would have gone Ubuntu LTS probably myself.
Right.
But it didn't seem crazy. One of the first servers I ever set up when I was starting to make the transition from playing with Linux on my little laptop to like, oh, okay, I'm going to try this on the server. It was like Fedora, I don't know, it's like 14, 15, somewhere in that era. And it was a fantastic server. So I knew it could work.
For a limited time, though, is usually the concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had that thing for a year or two at most, and I wasn't current on
And
updates.
it's a lot of updates. It is a lot of updates. That is something we had to deal with, which Arch will be the same way. Is there was sometimes updates that would then break things like our ZFS support momentarily.
We are running a lot of out-of-tree modules relative to
WireGuard,
most servers.
ZFS, to just name a couple of really critical ones. And that was a bit of a struggle, although not insurmountable, but it did cause probably one outage in total. But, one's something.
And I think we sort of found that while we liked Fedora, there was a lot going on that we appreciated. It's almost too complicated, too ready for the enterprise, if I'm allowed to use that phrase, because there were just a lot of systems in place for good reason that you would want and that were well configured, but that we just didn't need in our tiny, server use case here in the studio.
But end result was we were very, very happy with Fedora, and we're very much considering, because of that, going with CentOS 8 or CentOS 8 Stream, and then just loading ZFS support into that. However, we got talking about this from a kind of like a philosophical standpoint, and we realized this is something that we have an opportunity to kind of try and maybe bust a myth here on the show. We are the Linux Unplugged Mythbusters, because we have a theory, and that theory goes that if you were to build a minimum viable Linux server, or another way to put it is just enough Linux, so the system boots and launches containered applications, and it really does almost nothing else. Like how?
Right. I mean, it makes me think of some of those container-specific distributions, and we're not going that far because we still kind of want all of our usual tools.
Yeah. We go a little bit further because we install things like Netdata and Samba on the host system, but I think our base install is still well under a gig. It's a very minimal Linux install. Very few things are running, and we wanted something that was everything was off by default, and what we turn on incrementally is all that's running, with all the other functionality provided by applications and containers that are divorced from the host operating system. That was our theory. And we thought, well, in these conditions, if we could come up with a belt and suspenders approach to running Arch, it would probably be a viable server platform.
Right. I mean, we're both familiar with Arch, have run it many times.
And I think we nailed it. So I'll tell you what our belt and suspender was as we go here, because I think you're going to like this. But I first want to start... I want to set the scene. I didn't know exactly how Wes planned to pull this off, because here we are. We have a Fedora 30 box. It's in production. We've set an evening aside with the team. Hey, this thing's going to be offline for a couple of hours.
We weren't clear on that one.
Or like 6 hours, but we'll get to that. But I didn't exactly know how Wes was going to accomplish this. So I was delighted to learn exactly how we were going to install Arch on top of this existing Fedora instance.
Wes Payne has decided the best way to load Arch Linux on our server is to boot with an Ubuntu thumb drive.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Ubuntu is just a reliable operating system. Why not use it to install Arch? You get a GUI and everything.
It's great.
And I'd just like to point out that the Arch install scripts are packaged in the Ubuntu repository, so it couldn't be easier.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. Okay, so we've got the thumb drive. We've done a lot of the preliminary, so go ahead and fire it up. We've done some backups. We've exported the ZFS pool. We shut down the Docker containers. We're going to do one more export just to make sure everything's nice and clean of the ZFS pool. But job one now will be to boot off of this Ubuntu thumb drive and create an Arch chroot environment.
So these Arch install scripts, they're in the Ubuntu universe repo, so you got to turn on the universe repo, but what is this? Is this some sort of like backdoor way to get Arch on an Ubuntu system?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, so really it's just the minimal tools that, the Arch team has written to help aid you in the install. Things like Arch chroot or packstrap, just a little, a few utilities that can get things up and running, or like a Gen FSTab, the handy tool to make you an FSTab entry.
Yes, that was really nice.
And most of them, I mean, they just need sort of the core Unix tools, a lot of the stuff you would get in core utils.
So that was fun because I was really surprised to see that. And it was great since it supported all of our hardware, including the ZFS disks. And we, of course, had to struggle a little bit because it's a server. It's a super micro system, so it doesn't have a very fancy graphics card. But
no,
we managed to get that figured out by just going into safe graphics mode. And then it was off to the races and time to destroy some data.
We're up and running in Ubuntu safe graphics mode. And Wes was pretty clever choosing 1910 because it supports ZFS automatically, so that was really nice. And we've already made the drastic step of wiping out the partitions, and Wes is currently in the process of creating new ones. We're doing a really simple layout. The host drive will be btrfs. The storage array is ZFS. So we are doing a butter ZFS hybrid Arch install. We'll explain more about that. There we go. That's our 3 simple partitions. Have you written it to the disk yet?
No, not yet. Are we ready?
Let's do it. There's no turning back now. Go. Okay.
I didn't give you much notice. There was no time for you to say wait.
You were just like, well, you were just ready to go.
I had my finger hovering over the keyboard.
It's cold out there because this is Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I didn't have the most dexterity.
No, and it's a cold garage. data center. So I thought this would be kind of fun to just talk about on the show for a moment. How about a hybrid Arch file server that's btrfs on the OS disk and ZFS on the data disk?
Radical.
The further we got into this setup, the more I love it. And I think this is how I'm doing my workstation setups from now on too. And it really kind of comes down to how you set up the subvolumes for that belt and suspenders approach I was talking about.
Alex, right?
Okay, so we've done a simple disk layout, but inside that simple disk layout, we've created a series of btrfs subvolumes. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Well, we'd like the ability to take snapshots. Considering we're installing Arch here, down the road some packages may go wrong. And therefore we've got a root subvolume, and then we're also going to have some data stored under the home partition, maybe some of our Docker setup or other configuration. And we'd like that at probably a different cadence, right? We might integrate snapshots of the root file system with the package manager, or perhaps on a daily cadence and want something different for home. So we've got those separate, and then we've actually got a totally separate boot partition that we can take snapshots of as well.
I'm really looking forward to experimenting with integrating snapshots into Pac-Man. So before and after Pac-Man actions, we do a pre and post snapshot. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so we just got done setting up those subvolumes that will enable that flexibility once the system's up and running.
Now we got to get them mounted and cheroot inside.
Now, we should probably mention right here so that way we avoid confusion. Later, we decided it would probably be better to actually have /boot.
Right. Once we invested a little more in some of the tooling we'll talk about, we realized it just made more sense to do it that way.
Yeah.
But it's a flexible setup, and it wasn't much work to change.
Yeah. And this is great because, and we'll have a link to the wrappers to let you do this, but this is great because it lets you have a automated system that will take a complete snapshot before a package action and after, much like SUSE does, but for Pac-Man.
That's right. We didn't have to switch distributions.
And there is a way to extend that into Grub, so it also creates completely bootable snapshot environments. So we can just, from Grub, choose a previous environment and boot completely into it and revert all of the changes that happened on the system.
And that's really what we want here, right? I mean, if an update goes wrong, we're trying to stay on top of our updates for security and features. We want the ability to easily roll back if we don't have time to deal with any issues right now.
Yeah. And to kind of get that boot environment thing working and the Pac-Man integration, that's where it was sort of necessary just because of some of the assumptions the tools make. That's where it was sort of necessary to have boot on the root file system.
And it kind of makes sense, too, to have snapshots sort of integrated so we have a full snapshot of basically everything we need for the system, especially the way, by default, how Arch does kernels as compared to, say, Ubuntu with a whole bunch of versions laying around.
Yeah. And that's why home is its own subvolume, so we can snapshot that independently. So that's kind of nice. And then all of the data and the container data and all of that is living on ZFS. So you could completely just unplug the OS drive and plug in a new OS and then just re-import the ZFS pool, which is kind of essentially what we did. But we hadn't actually cherooted and booted into it yet. So once we got all the subvolumes created, Wes used the Arch setup scripts and set up an environment, and we went through and configured FSTab and generated that.
Arch has also got a handy little bootstrap tarball image you can download that has basically everything you need.
It really was great. It was really nice to go through this process again and really just understand how clean the setup is on the server.
I've never installed Arch with someone else before, so that was kind of fun, too.
It was fun. I haven't either. It actually was a lot of fun.
We installed it together.
And, our favorite part, I think, was doing FDisk because, that's old school and setting all those up and, deciding what the volumes are going to be and how to lay that out. That's fun to do with somebody else. But then there's that moment where you got to reboot from the host Ubuntu system, and you have to boot into your handcrafted Arch environment.
Did we get it right?
Did we get it right? Will it actually boot?
We've done everything on the checklist so far as I can tell, but can you ever really know until you push the button?
No, we just got to find out. So here we go. This will be a nice, lean, mean, just enough Linux installation if all goes as planned. But I don't know, something about this first boot, it's always the most special.
I made some sous vide pork shoulder this weekend,
I thought you were going to say something about this. You did, huh? Yeah. That's funny. We just picked up some pork shoulder, and we are planning to sous vide it. How'd it go?
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
Sous vide tips with Wes Payne. All right. Selecting the built-in boot disk. Welcome to Grub.
Got grub.
Monitor power save mode at the worst possible moment. Arch Linux grub option comes up. Hit it, Wes.
Boom.
Loading Linux.
It's those little large details.
Yeah. All
AKA
right.
the default configuration for all software.
Yeah. Okay. System D is starting up.
Version 2.44.
This is getting pretty far. Like, I'm feeling pretty good about our potential.
See some.
Oh yeah, our ZFS array is lighting up. Look at that. And we're at the boot. Just like that. We're done.
Any thoughts, guesses? Do you think ZFS is going to load?
I do.
RDK
Because
must work?
those discs lit up, I think it's going to work. Go ahead and hit it. Let's see. Little mod probe ZFS.
No problem.
There it goes.
So that'll just scan it. Now we've seen it, and we can actually import it fully online.
I think the next step is to set up SSH on this thing. And we get ourselves out of this cold server room. And we set this up from the comfort of the studio.
That's a great idea.
I think in our rush to get out of the cold garage, we may have made a slight mistake. We did not unplug the thumb drive from the back of the server.
No. Ubuntu, in fairness, which I always complain about, but it hopefully prompts you that you should do that.
Yeah.
We didn't listen.
No, we just want to get the heck out of there. And then we also, during our setup, because we were really just enjoying the simplicity of things, we made a decision for simplicity that ended up costing us several hours, maybe 2.5 hours, if I'm being generous, of time. Once we went back in the living room, we were troubleshooting this issue where we would fire up all of the containers and everything would start. They would know nothing in the logs was weird, but none of them could communicate with the network.
But at first, it wasn't even none. There were a couple that would work.
Right.
So it wasn't like it was a total failure.
It wasn't obvious because a couple did work.
The containers were up, the ports were forwarded, but we couldn't get to all the services.
No. And it was simply because of a decision we had made hours earlier. But in the order of process, we hadn't realized we were making a critical decision that would affect us later on. Well, a couple of hours now in the living room of the studio, working from the couch, much more comfortable than the garage. But we ran into a couple of snags that we didn't quite expect. One which we'll tell you about in just a moment, but the one that we should probably warn you about first of all is some of the troubles we ran into with systemd networkd and how it interacts with Docker, which it's documented. We kind of probably should have known about it, but didn't. It was just because of the way we built this thing up from the ground up, didn't really hit it until it was already an issue.
Yeah, we were attracted to systemd networkd because it's so simple. You make one file with like 3 lines. We have DHCP. There's one interface that we care about. It was easy. But then you have to start jumping through hoops to get it to ignore Docker. It tries to basically manage any interface it can get its hands on by default. We've just disabled it and are moving back to DHCP CD.
Yeah, that'll work for now. And it means that our applications in the containers are spinning up successfully, and they're pretty much none the wiser. They have no idea that we just transitioned from Fedora to Arch and just turned them back on again. And the ZFS stuff seems to be working pretty well. Oh, except for that one thing.
Yeah. So we had this kind of moment where we thought, we gone done mess with stuff and we broke a couple of hard drives.
We were expecting this to be easy, right? I mean, that was the whole point of the way we'd set the system up, is just lift and shift.
Right. But a couple of decisions we had made for simplicity had actually screwed us. Number one, the fact that we use DHCP for our server. However, and I have done this for, ever? A very long time. I set my servers via DHCP, but I do it with a reserved address. So everything's mapped to the MAC address.
Right. We could just statically assign it and it would work just fine.
But I've always preferred to do it that way. So that way, even remotely, I can change the IPs of systems.
It centralizes your admin right there.
Yeah. And we chose to use systemd networkd instead of just going with a straightforward DHCP client.
And I'll take the fall for this one because I proposed it. I really like systemd networkd. At least in the other use cases I've used it for. The Linux-based router I have at my house, that's all powered basically by systemd networkd. but it also uses nspawn. So I've used systemd network with nspawn and Podman. Now that I think about it, not a ton with Docker, so I really hadn't encountered this issue before.
It shows up as a new interface to systemd network D, and it's like, oh, well, let me take care of that for you.
And we have a lot of Docker interfaces. And one of those Docker containers is also managing WireGuard, which needs a whole bunch of more complications involved.
Yeah.
So there are definitely ways you can tell systemd network D, hey, don't manage this link. Make sure that forwarding works as we expect. But for our case, because we weren't using any of the features really of systemd network D besides its DHCP support, DHCP CD works very well.
And then there's that disk issue that I was implying there at the end of that clip. When we loaded up, it said, hey, 3 disks are offline. And, the system isn't that old, but it did get really hot in there over the summer despite our best efforts. And we looked at each other and we thought, maybe powering this thing on and off again a few times pop some disks. It wasn't nearly that bad, though, was it?
No. I mean, they're probably still old disks, and we should consider upgrading anyway.
Yeah.
But the pool's fine. The pool is fine.
It is fine. All the disks are online. All 13 drives are actually operating. But I think in part was it because it thought...
Well, so we were just going through this. It's not like we had a major plan or a giant sort of sophisticated write-up. Yeah. I mean, we may have done this as a sort of...
We're the kind of guys that put Arch on the server, Wes. I think that's enough said.
Right. And so normally when you're setting up ZFS, I've normally sort of mapped out ahead, like how I'm going to shape the pool. But because we were just sort of importing a pool that already existed.
Yeah, we inherited that.
Right. And so we just popped over to the ZFS page on the Arch Wiki and entered the first command that you saw. And it's like, oh yeah, import the pool. That looks great. We did not remember, and I do usually like to do this, is have ZFS use the disk IDs and not whatever SDX it happens to be assigned.
Uh-huh.
And because we still had that USB drive plugged in, all of our drive names were shifted and messed up. Well, not all of them. The few that happened to be assigned after that device. So that's why I couldn't find the disks. Mm-hmm. Linux could see them, but they had new names to ZFS.
I was convinced, it's like, oh man, we killed them. Like just turning them on and off. Because one of the things we thought we'd do is we'll do a full shutdown. We'll test this thing. We'll do a full power off and power on. And that's when we thought, let's then check the disk. And that's when we saw that, well, 3 of them are not responding. But thankfully, it was all resolved.
Right. I mean, you just had to export and then re-import, telling it like, hey, label these this way. ZFS is smart. And on the upside, it, of course, goes and, rechecks, scrubs the data to make sure, like, oh, does this match up with what I think I should have for this disk, and add it back into the pool. It did find some checksum issues on the drive. So we do have some homework.
Right. Yeah, it does turn out that perhaps it's a good thing we're using ZFS and that bit rot protection, because we do have some disks that are kicking errors. Oops. I mean, that's why you use something like ZFS for your important data, right? So, I mean, I'm feeling good about that decision. So going back to those belt and suspenders, we did decide to use Snapper from OpenSUSE, which is integrated in both as a snapshot that does a snapshot every single week, but also with a Pacman wrapper. And this is our kind of insurance. Even though it's a very, very simple base Arch install that we'll just update once a week, this kind of integration with snapshots with ButterFS, which is baked into the Linux kernel, unlike ZFS, is our insurance policy.
Right. So we should be clear, right? The ZFS pool is the existing pool we've inherited all the way from when the system originally ran FreeNAS. And that's great. It keeps our data safe, as we were just talking about. ButterFS we're just using on the one disk that we have that's actually sitting outside of the server case that we're running the OS on. And that's kind of played in this role, right? Basically, all of our data is on the pool, and we can mix and match OSs as we see fit.
Yeah. The one thing we need to change is we need to get the Docker Compose files off of the OS disk. Not a big deal. We have a backup of them.
I think we might just want to move the home partition over to the pool.
Could. Totally could. Actually, that's a really interesting idea. That would be a good way to do that. I like having the separation of OS and data, though, because if now we have, I think, really proven it 3 times over. We have gone... Initially, this pool initially started inside of a FreeNAS Mini.
Right.
An actual enclosure with 4 disks. And then Alan came along and we said, let's turn this thing up to 11. And we got a super micro enclosure.
Great recommendation. I mean, it's been a great server.
Super solid. Really been nice. And took those disks in there, plus added all the way up to 13 disks total, and took that to a FreeNAS install on a super micro chassis. And then we said, hey, you know what? Let's go crazy. What's the most ridiculous thing we could do? Let's put Fedora on here. That's when we put it on Fedora. And then we got to the end of that. We said, well, what's even crazier than Fedora in production? Let's put Arch on here. And this ZFS pool has moved every single time.
I think we learned some stuff too about how we wanted to use the box along the way, because when we switched over to Fedora, we talked about how we discovered that it was more useful to us. And I think that helped shape why pick Arch, because it turns out we're doing everything in containers besides like cockpit and admin stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need a lot in the OS.
Yeah. As a FreeNAS storage box, it was a storage appliance that we dumped files on. When we moved to Fedora, we expanded the applications that we could run on it. We really kind of started enjoying using the system. We realized this thing's got 24 cores. Like, this is insane. Like, we can use this for encoding.
It doesn't have to just be a file server.
And it changed the way we use the hardware fundamentally. And so this go around, we had all of that kind of experience of, now, well, this is really, like you're saying, this is how we use the machine now. This is how we use it. And so this super simple core approach, I think, is the key to a long-term sustainable Arch install. So we're gonna set ourselves a reminder to check in on this box and let you know how it's doing, because obviously the real like, I don't want to say proof in the pudding, because you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying.
We suspect that you'll be curious to see how this is working out for us in
well, yeah, because like
months.
I can say it's been great for 24 hours, but the real proof will be in the long term. I don't know, like 6 months from now. We'll talk about it after the show and figure out when's a good check-in date. Probably sooner than 6 months, because it could go all wrong in 90 days for all I know.
Yeah, right. We'll let you know.
Yeah, it's a lot of updates. I mean, it's a lot.
I've been very pleased with the tooling we've adopted, and that was part of the reason to choose ButterFS, right? Is that, Canonical's working on things like ZSys, but right now, OpenSUSE and, the integration with Snapper and YAS, that's kind of the state of the art on the Linux side of things. I know, the BSDs have very neat solutions here too. And we wanted that goodness, and using ButterFS, at least on our, just single, no RAID or anything, right on the root drive, it's been so easy.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll probably replicate that on my laptops.
Anytime we make a change, you run Pacman and you get 2 snapshots before and after.
I've been hard on ButterFS, Wes, but I'm not expecting a lot here. I'm not trying to do a RAID 6, or I'm not trying to do anything fancy. It's just a super simple one disk install.
We also don't care about the data. I mean, we care a little bit.
Wes, I was trying to make that a nice thing.
Oh.
I was trying to make that like Chris says something nice about ButterFS, and you just were like, yeah, but it's also because you don't care about the data, which just sort of undercuts the whole sincerity of it.
Whoops.
I want to talk about something that I think that was kind of our key to success, because this did end up going longer, but we kind of also knew when to call it a night, because before we started, and credit goes to you, Wes, you said, all right, before we start, what's our benchmark of success? When have we successfully converted this thing to a production server again? And so we took a hot couple of minutes before we started deleting partitions, and we said to ourselves, all right, when it is capable of running all of the applications the current production server runs, when it is capable of supporting WireGuard connections with our existing keys.
Yeah, that's pretty important.
Because we didn't want to have to force all of the team to...
We just got that working nicely.
Yeah, we just got all their keys out there and everybody, yeah. And also, we wanted to end with something that this system could do that the previous system couldn't do. And that was where we integrated Snapper with Grub, with Pacman, and on a weekly basis. And that was something I asked you, I was like, are we going to like blow out all of our disk space by using snapshots? But I guess Snapper actually shipped with some pretty sensible defaults.
Right. I mean, you can go adjust settings and tunings to say how often should you take snapshots, and then how long should you let them hang around. And there's just some system D services you can enable to set up the automatic prune job.
Not so bad.
No.
And we thought, really, for something we're not using that often from at a base OS level, once a week is enough.
Right. I mean,
plus every package transaction.
That's it. That's the majority of system changes we'll be making, and then some snapshots around to capture anything else we might mess with, configuration in Etsy, for example.
Yeah, because literally it's NetData, Samba, and Cockpit. Those are the 3 applications
SSH.
we have installed.
But it's just admin stuff.
I really consider SSH almost like part of the system, right? I really do. Like, as far as like we went out and installed something, Cockpit and NetData.
Oh, you have to install the SSH package.
Yes. Okay. Fine. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll count it. 4. We've installed 4
But
applications.
really, that's it. It's just admin stuff we need on the box for ease of life stuff to monitor what's going on.
It's truly a fundamentally simple system. There's nothing really all that fancy other than the only kind of edge casey thing is the ZFS DKMS stuff. And that's why I thought it was pretty important we didn't use ZFS en route. We went ButterFS, so that way the system would at least boot if something went sideways.
Yes, it's just simpler, right? Worst case, I mean, we still have some outage issues because the applications don't come online, but we've got our environment set up to actually deal with that in an easy way.
We can at least log into the machine and begin to troubleshoot and rebuild those DKMS modules and get the system back online.
Something I'll need to find for the show notes, and this is a little reminder to myself here. There's a handy little script because we have Docker sitting on top of ZFS, which also made this so easy. Docker has a ZFS driver, and it meant that all the Docker stuff from our previous install was already on the pool. So once we loaded Docker back up on the system, it just found all of its old containers exactly like it needed.
Yeah. It was just pick up and run.
But as a result, you need your ZFS pool online before you can have your Docker daemon start. So there is a handy little systemd service that just sort of acts as a shim and doesn't start Docker until your ZFS pool is actually online.
Oh, okay.
And that's one thing we did not have on our Fedora setup.
Yeah. No, that did cause problems. So I feel like, again, lessons learned on this build. And then taking what you and I know about managing Arch boxes and applying it to a server, I think we're pretty good.
I will say when I got in this morning, I did run updates on the server, so...
That's going to be it. Like we talked about, do we want to automate the updates? And we both decided, even with snapshots, probably not. Both from like a storage use standpoint, but also just to be careful for a while. With maybe something we'll try. Maybe if we get a few months into this and everything's fine, maybe we'll try it.
There is the added benefit of if we have to do updates, we'll have to at least log into the system, and that's sort of an incentive to check around on things.
I would like to know, I'm sure there must be other crazy pants people out in the audience that are running Arch on a server. Have you automated the updates? Have you found a way, like, can you have it like ping a Slack channel? What are you doing? How are you doing that part of it?
I'd be curious if anyone's building custom Arch images out there too, because that would be my approach probably, is to set up a job to bake a new image and then just have the server, reboot into it.
Yeah. Oh. So you would build that somewhere safe, test it, and then deploy it to the box, and then just say, next time you reboot, tell grub, next time you boot into this instance?
Right.
Like a partition that just the image gets expanded onto. Sort of using like your own home-baked OS tree approach.
Exactly.
Huh. That's a lot of work to maintain one Arch box, but I could totally see the value if you had like a whole rack of them.
Right. Then the testing would matter more, and you'd really want to be sure before you pushed it out.
Yeah, I feel like really almost something. Just imagine. Picture it, Wes. Sicily, 1987.
The Arch heyday.
Everybody knows. A Slack message comes in that says, in 24 hours, I'm auto-installing these packages. But of course, by then there'd be more packages.
There are tools that'll, help scrape the Arch website, check for things. You can probably tie those things together. If there's not been a blog post since the last update on the Arch page, just install them. Otherwise, prompt for my approval.
Somebody must have solved this. Somebody must have. And so I thought I'd put the question out to the audience, linuxunplugged.com/contact, if this is something you've got an idea on how to solve.
Just tell us the weird ways you're abusing Arch. That's what we want to know.
It's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. And I think if we had thought about the DHCP systemd networkd thing ahead of time.
Yeah, it was just an instinct of like, the last time I used this tool, I liked it a lot, so why don't we use it?
I think we would have had this thing in like 2-3 hours.
Once that was done, really, the dream of just being able to move the containers over, it worked great.
Yeah, it really was pretty awesome.
I will say also, it was just, installing Arch is just a dream, and I love understanding all the pieces of the system. It does constantly give you moments of like, oh, right, yep, got to get that and that.
Yes.
But that's a good reminder of all the implicit dependencies you have on pieces of the other operating system. I think for you, add user was a good example of that.
I thought that was I didn't realize that was a Debian thing. I went to go add user, and I'm like, what do you mean you don't have add user? What is this? And you're like, it's in the AUR. I'm not installing it. It's fine. Also, Nano? I mean, this is 2019. I think we're all civilized here. Let's install Nano in the base
we agreed
image.
to just ship VS Code instead.
Or at least Vim, for heaven's sake.
Please.
Watching Wes try to use a system without Vim is painful.
It's very painful. It's ingrained in my fingers.
It's literally every single time he forgets. He never remembers that Vim is not installed.
That's how I edit.
All right. Well, Richard wrote in on some Arch update tips. He says you can slowly apply back patches to Arch Linux and not apply months worth at a single time. If you edit a repo to a specific date, say 2 weeks out, then you can run the update against that. And he gives us an example, which we'll have linked in the show notes. After you set that, you save and exit, and you update the system via Pacman, and it will only go back to that date range.
This is clever.
I never knew about this.
No, and it makes sense though. You'll still have breakage. You have to progress with the updates, but
yes,
that should make it easier to deal with sort of one thing at a time.
So you could go back and if you're 6 months back, you go all six, you just 1 month at a time. Wow. He says, once you're caught up, restore your original pacman.conf file to normal without the date ranges in there, and you're good to go. You just keep updating from there word forward. Also, a note for the nervous updater, the program Informant, which is in the AUR, prevents you from upgrading if there is a fresh Arch News item that you have not yet read since the last time you ran updates.
You might want that for your Manjaro box.
His base Arch image is still from the Antigross install he did back during our Arch Challenge, which was March 29th, 2016.
Wow.
And he's kept it running ever since.
Let's hope that's the future of our server.
No kidding. I mean, you and I were kind of joking. We were like, this took us about 5 hours or so, 6 hours, I don't know, whatever, to set up. But if we were the types to leave something and not fix something that isn't broken.
Which, fingers crossed, maybe someday we'll become those people.
This could be our forever install. It's our forever server, Wes.
It could. I like it right now.
Wes, we built a little forever server.
Aww.
And it's working, which there were moments when it wasn't. When we first started the containers and the networking wasn't work, I thought we had leaped too far. And I was legitimately concerned that I would never see my pillow again. But thankfully, we figured it out pretty quick. Well, Wes figured it out, really. I read forum posts and suggested different things while Wes ignored me and fixed it. So that worked out pretty well.
What matters is that we fixed it.
Yeah, really. Anybody in the virtual lug there running Arch on their production system?
Yep, been running it about since April now.
Oh, really? On a server or on a workstation?
It's on my XPS 13, and it's also running grub-btrfs, actually. I did it as a bit of an experiment, and it's gone quite well.
Oh.
Yeah. If somebody installs a system on Arch, they've got to tell you about it. So that's why this podcast exists today.
Amen.
We are completing the circle of meme life right there. I acknowledge that. Brent, I know you're on Arch as your daily production system. What did you use for your VPS for WireGuard?
That's something I have yet to solve.
Really?
So I didn't actually get WireGuard working on my laptop because I made a subtle mistake when I installed it during the Antigross challenge that you gave a long time ago, which was to put too small of a system partition. So I'm having a hard time upgrading anything because I'm out of space there.
Oh.
And it's a real disaster. So it didn't quite work for me.
Oh, we could help with that. Because in this process, we realized that we had made boot its own dedicated 2 gigabyte partition, and then realized, well, crap, we don't need that. It needs to be part of our root partition. And then, what are we going to do with this 2 gigs? There are a lot of options. There's some fancy dancing you can do.
As long as you're willing to wait for GPAR to drag bytes around.
Yeah.
Well, I admit that my partition is also encrypted, so that should add an extra level of fun.
Attaboy.
Gotta learn sometime.
Telling you what, we need to have a laptop support week where the 3 of us get together. I reload to Arch, you reload your box, Wes, and we help Brent out with his partitioning scheme.
Alex really tried to help me do a fresh Arch install, and I didn't finish it. So sorry, Alex, but I'll get there.
The problem is there's work to be done, and that system is functional. It's just tight on space, right? It's just and hard to update, but it's still working. So I've been there.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been there.
I've been there. I'm really hoping we don't put the server in that position. I feel like this minimum viable Linux thing, just enough Linux, is the key to success here. What are we going to update on that box that's going to break?
There's not a lot.
Not
I mean,
a
I think
lot.
the biggest thing, it will be, kernel updates, but we've got snapshots for that.
Yep. And we can just boot into the old environment or boot into the old kernel or whatever, because the host operating system will still load regardless. And so that's, from there, it's just minutes to resolve an issue. And that's, I think both you and I felt a lot more comfortable managing a Linux box versus a FreeNAS box simply because of this exact reason. If we have to SSH into the host, we're good to go. No problem. We're comfortable there.
And I mean, it just lowers the debug cycle. It's not that we mind having to fix occasional problems, but if it's a 10-minute thing versus like an hour thing, and I mean, it's a real server build, it's not fast to boot up. So every time you have to mess with trying to reboot and test something,
all the
it's a long
controllers
wait.
and it's just everything's slow on booting a server. It's
But if
really
you've already
slow.
booted and you just need to test if you can load a module, that's fast.
Yep. So we're going to do this so you don't have to. So don't do this at home. You should, probably use Ubuntu LTS or CentOS, something.
I think I am going to rebuild my router on Arch again.
I know. I was thinking it'd be really nice to run those Raspberry Pi 4s with Arch.
Oh.
And AUR. I appreciate Flatpak snaps and app images and RPMs and debs and TARs and all of that. But one package manager to rule it all. One package manager to install a package, to update my packages. It's just so nice. Like watching you, legitimately, I'm laughing at you hunt around on Microsoft's site trying to get the Teams deb. Meanwhile, I literally tries in -S Teams. And just hit enter, and it just goes out and installs it.
And what I love about it is it's so simple, right? Like, I mean, you can have these complicated managers that do a lot for you, but at the same time, I mean, Make Package is great. The package config files, you can mess with it. They even prompt you, do you want to make any changes to this thing? So it's so accessible because it's like radically simple.
I think I'm going to enjoy that a lot. Anyways, but we'll come back. If this blows up on our face, well, we'll tell you about it.
Yeah, you'll hear about it.
But we'll check back in. We haven't determined when yet, but we'll powwow after the show.
Maybe let us know.
Yeah, let us know what you'd like. That's a great idea. Look at you, Wes. JupiterBroadcasting.com/Telegram or LinuxUnplugged.com/contact, like Richard did here with his update trick on setting the repo dates back. Pfft, that's
Brilliant.
so cool.
Thank you, Richard.
And like I said, we'll have examples linked in the show notes if you want to check that out. Well, Mr. Payne, is there any other bits of business we need to attend to on today's Unplugged program?
No, I mean, maybe I'll just update the server again real quick. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a fidget spinner. You just, when you feel bored, you just go do a quick update on the old server.
We already got a snapper update this morning.
Did we really?
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Isn't that funny? Something that's really kind of you think of as an OpenSUSE thing. And here we are, all the way over here in Archland using it. I just love
Hopefully
open source.
that update didn't break our update protection.
Oh,
Guess
no.
we'll find out.
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up there. It is getting towards the end of the year, so that means our predictions episode. We've got some special stuff planned, so please join us live because there's so much more to participate in, but also just sit back and enjoy probably a whole nother show's worth over at jblive.tv. We do it on a Tuesday at noon Pacific. You get that converted over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. I'm also going to give a personal plug to my buddies over at User Air. Latest episode was so great.
So funny.
User Air is so fun. Check it out. Air.show. Really, really great. And Brent, another fantastic brunch with Mr. Popey over at extras.show and Wes Payne over at techsnap.systems. And this here humble podcast will be right back here next Tuesday. Wes, no matter how much we disclaim that people should not do this at home, we're going to get a lot of crap for installing Arch on a server.
I think our lawyers advised us to read a long legal spiel about liability.
The Linux Unplugged program does not endorse running your home server on a rolling distribution.
And will not be held liable for any package upgrades that fail.
That'd be really funny if we actually were in that situation, and also horrible. JB
We will
titles.
fix your server, but it's $500 an hour.
Oh, yeah, a little side biz right there, little side hustle. Thank you, Mumble Room, for being here today. I really do appreciate everybody showing up at the new time. It's still kind of new. It's still
Thank you
very new.
for joining us.
Yeah.
It's still new to us. Yeah.
Very new. So very much a big thank you for being here. Appreciate you guys. And appreciate you live streamers too. Man, you know what?
It's so much fun live.
While I'm thinking about it, Wes, you know who else I appreciate? People who download the podcast too.
yeah.
You. Appreciate you. Not Joe Resington, though.